Hey, everybody. Happy Tuesday. And more importantly, happy Spooktober. That's right. It's the first day of October, Adam. That means it's the first day of Halloween.
Right. Wow.
Did you get the Halloween decorations out? Did you get the giant, like 10-foot tall skeleton to put outside your house?
My God. My neighbor right across the street has easily a 20-foot Jack Skellington in his front yard.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
I know.
Okay,
I
awesome.
was like,
Awesome.
I feel a little left out here. Maybe we'll have
There
to
you
put
go.
a pumpkin out or something.
Yeah, no, you have to compete, obviously. See, competition, not only in the marketplace, but in the neighboring space, right? That's what makes everything better.
Oh, yeah.
Gotta
Yeah.
get in the spirit. So anyway, happy Halloween. And it's funny, just on the first day of Halloween, we have the vice presidential debate tonight. So
Yes.
we will be talking about that tomorrow.
Yes.
But
Because nobody
tonight,
cares about the vice
yes,
presidential
nobody cares
debate.
enough. I mean, there's some interesting things. I'm curious to see what will come up. But yeah, it's not as important as the presidential debate, obviously. But right now, so we're going to be talking about this was a very interesting debate here. This was Andrew Wilson was on Tim Pool's show, and it kind of broke into this conversation about natural rights. And it's funny because when you're watching it, I feel like Andrew Wilson went into this conversation with the intention to try to pick this fight in the first place. He
Of
doesn't,
course.
yeah, Andrew Wilson is, I believe he wants some kind of religious theocratic society or something. And so he's trying to attack, kind of this foundation of liberalism in terms of basing it on this concept of, the libertarian view of natural rights and things of that nature that are not necessarily, rooted in a kind of, even though natural rights are rooted in, like originally we're rooted in a divine theocratic perspective. So I don't know why necessarily he's sort of on this track. But I guess nowadays, a lot of times when libertarians talk about them, they don't really talk about them. They kind of remove the God aspect from the equation usually.
Right. He's saying that you can't have natural rights with some sort of rational justification for those natural rights, and his rational justification is God.
Right. Well, I don't know if he's, yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
Is
Cause I
that
don't
a
know if,
rational justification?
well, I don't know if it's that, I don't know if it's that there's not a rational justification or if it's just that there's like, they're axiomatic. They're in terms of like, you just accept them somewhat on faith value.
Well, he does specifically say that you have to have rational justifications for the things that you believe in. I don't necessarily know that you can make God that rational justification.
Right.
I just
Well,
know, look,
yeah,
I guess we're
unless
talking
you've
about the
like,
difference between rationalism and empiricism. So,
right.
yeah.
Unless you've experienced some sort of divine thing, then maybe you could like make it on a personal level, you could make that argument, I guess. But for other people, sure. Um, but yeah, we'll get into it. But right before we start, I want to read the super chat. The Butter Amble for $5 says basically my exact feeling about this whole situation. Says I have cognitive dissonance in that I don't believe natural rights are really real, but I would give my life to keep them existing. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, keep people believing in it. I
We'll
don't.
keep the rights as something that the government protects, our society protects.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's why we'll kind of have a interesting and maybe unique take on this conversation because we both disagree with Wilson's sort of end point in the conversation, but I think we both agree that neither of us, much to some contention in our
I
audience,
know we
neither of us,
constantly have this argument with our chat. Yeah.
right, neither of us believes natural rights are really real, just as Butter Amble said, but we do believe that they are a useful fiction for society to protect through violence.
Yeah, there's kind of a contradiction that goes on here that makes a lot of people uncomfortable because obviously Sitch and I are both not in favor of the philosophy of might makes right. So, but we understand that there is some of that going on in the natural rights situation where any rights that you have, you kind of have to fight for, and you have to fight for them by being more powerful than other people who want to deny you those rights. So, that sort of situation sort of makes people jump to the fact that they think that you are inconsistent. They think that you're making some sort of contradiction when
Right.
that's
Well,
not the
actually,
case. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think sometimes when we've had this conversation about this, and I think I've said things about might makes right, which I don't actually think I agree with now, or I think there's a better way to
Oh,
conceptualize them,
interesting. Okay, cool.
which is that while it's true, obviously, when you're talking about in a country or on the world stage, an individual or a country has to use violence to protect its way of life, its society, its rights, blah, 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 blah.
Of course.
Just
Lethal
because,
violence.
right. I feel like there's a sort of incorrect conflation here. Just because a government or a country has to use the threat of force to maintain its laws, either, here or if they're being invaded or something, that doesn't mean that might makes right. That's not what that means. And I think there's some
Okay,
like a
interesting.
confusion there because what might makes right means is that you're operating from a philosophical standpoint where you say that whoever is the strongest philosophically gets to determine what the rules are, and you think that's the way it should be. Might makes right is sort of is like a prescription of how things should be.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
And so, yeah, and
Yes.
so like even though America will defend its liberty and freedom and its citizens with violence, it's not operating from a standpoint where it believes that. It's operating from a standpoint that, humans have these natural rights, blah, 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 and that we should be protecting them, especially for American citizens.
Right. The thing that happens is and the belief of liberalism is that you'll get a more productive society if people have some latitude of freedom. But the
Right.
real world often wants to step in and deny people that freedom. So if you kind of conceptualize it as the state is building a wall around the people to give them this individual freedom,
Mm-hmm.
and the building of that wall is basically keeping out all the people who would deny you of that freedom through physical force, through violence, through might makes right, basically saying we're going to protect these freedoms, and we even go as far as calling them natural rights to kind of make the point. But I think a lot of people inside that zone where they have all of this personal freedom, like they're lulled into this false sense of security where they think, "Oh, this is just the natural state of the world, right? Nobody wants to come in and deny me my rights. These rights just exist naturally in the world, like the
Right.
Pythagorean theorem out there on some shelf,
You're
right?"
right. Right. Right.
But no, that's not the case. You're forgetting about that wall of violence that is protecting our way of life, right? Does that make sense? Is that
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the big problem with a lot of societies that whatever environment people live in, they think that's like the default way of existence. And
yes,
it can make them become complacent in terms of believing that you don't need to protect, these freedoms. You don't need to protect this way of life
right.
from degrading or getting corrupted.
It's kind of like living in an air conditioned building and you're like, oh, the weather is always so temperate.
Yeah.
Well, step outside, okay?
Until the power goes out. Yeah. Then you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Not so
Right.
temperate anymore, is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good
So,
point. So anyway, let's jump into this here.
The Taliban, and Trump's negotiating, and Trump says, send a picture of his house. And the guy says, why do you send a picture of my house? And he's like, you have to figure that one out. But there's a point that we know where you are, we know who you are, and we have the power to get you. There's a lot of questions about the killing of Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki. Why did we bomb a country we're not at war with? Why were we targeting civilians? And how did we accidentally kill this guy? I think it's unreasonable to assume those are all accidents. I think it's actually simple. Barack Obama said, make sure they all know the price you will pay if you raise arms against the United States.
Sure. But let's look at this objectively too. This idea of rights as a United States citizen, these are really just constructions of the mind. There's no such thing as an actual right. It doesn't exist outside of some axiomatic kind of philosophical principled belief, right? I have the axiom that I have inalienable rights, and so therefore I have them.
Disagree.
Okay, and we can.
Well, I guess this feels kind of like the leftist everything is a social construct argument. Because like, okay, that's technically true because you're defining things in a specific way to make it true. But if everything is something, like if everything is a social construct, if every belief you have at the end of the day, if you keep, breaking it down and down and down and down, you have to get to some sort of axiomatic belief that you take on faith, or as you could define that as a construction of the mind, then why does it matter? Then who cares?
yeah. So the way that he grounds the rights is shaky, is what you're saying.
Well, I guess it's only useful. I mean, I guess you could say, to be good faith here, it is important to bring up, if you're arguing against someone who's saying that their argument is based on something inherent in nature or the universe, I guess,
Mhm.
but then it's just, it goes into that weird category problem where it's like, okay, well, if you just categorize, if you just define everything as a social construct, then nothing is inherently natural from that perspective. And so it's like, okay, well, then your argument, it's like, it's pointless. It's like, well, then just don't make the argument, because you're just saying, if everything is this one thing, then it doesn't matter anymore, essentially.
Right. The the thing that always gets under my skin is when they start talking about things being arbitrary. And they do this specifically to make the case that without some sort of God or religious structure,
Right.
then all of
Right.
the rights are purely arbitrary, which is completely false because obviously, like all of these societies are competing on different philosophies that are guiding the society, different philosophies that guide different behaviors. And those societies are competing out in the world for resources and members. Now, if one society all of a sudden becomes a world superpower, right?
Mhm.
You would say, well, is that rule set arbitrary? Look, we give one nation this rule set and one nation this rule set, and one becomes North Korea and one becomes the United States of America. How are those rule sets arbitrary?
They're not. They're
Yeah,
not.
they're not. They're
No.
completely not.
Right. And I think this is where we get into, and this comes up. I'm not gonna bring it up, except to just say this is when this comes up in the whole objective morality conversation, is that there's a conflation. Well, no, but this is to your point. Okay.
No,
There's a
I understand. I
conflation
understand. Look,
that happens
thank
in these conversations where people conflate the quote
universal.
arbitrariness
Yeah.
of the goal of something with the quote arbitrariness of how to get to the goal. And it's like,
Yes,
okay,
totally.
like, yeah, if we all agree that there's an axiomatic belief about how that we want society to be, you know, the most good for the most people or something, whatever kind of platitude you want to shove in there, right? We want to have a society that is free and produces, a lot of value in terms of not just material wealth, but spiritual and philosophical and mental wealth and health and well-being for the society, right? If that's the goal, okay, we accept that that's an arbitrary or quote arbitrary axiomatic goal or belief, but there has to be some objective way to get there.
Achieve
That's the
that goal.
best
Yeah.
way to achieve that goal.
Of course. Yeah. That's a great point. You have to separate those. I did not know that the objectivists, the Ayn Randian objectivists,
Mm-hmm.
say that human life is the measure of all that is good. So they literally they literally say that that is the objective measure of any philosophy, which I was like, oh
It's just
wow.
whatever produces more human life.
More yeah,
Interesting.
like human thriving. I finally found an objectivist that I listened to that I was like, wow, this guy really knows his shit. And he kind of sold me a little bit on objectivism, which I've been completely against because of the whole. I think the objectivists have it wrong on selflessness versus selfishness. I think
Yes.
obviously all moral systems revolve around turning individuals into a cooperative community. And in order to do that, those individuals have to become at least somewhat selfless, right? But this idea that the measure of a moral system is how it affects human life. I was
Mhm.
like, oh, that's completely accurate. And it is the goal of evolution, whether people like it or not. It's completely, I mean, that's where it comes from. That's where it evolves from.
Yeah, I don't know too much about objectivism. I don't like Ayn Rand,
Right.
particularly as a person. I've, read a bunch of her quotes and I've read a bunch of things that she's talked about, and they seem to be like horrible. And so my kind of stereotype, whether it's correct or not, my stereotype of objectivism and Ayn Rand's beliefs is that this sort of maximizing of selfishness is a good thing,
Yeah.
essentially. And obviously, I agree with you because we both look at morality as this evolved process that, the human animal had to have in order to cooperate. That kind of means that objectivism, or at least that selfish belief, should be like an anti-moral uh, philosophy or an anti-moral
Right. Right.
philosophical,
Yeah.
uh, belief system. So it doesn't really make sense to me from that notion. So that is interesting though, because it kind of contends with the sort of what you were saying. Who's this guy that you're talking about? That was
I
like,
can't remember. I can't. I'll send you a
okay.
video during the week because I
'Cause I
watched
know
a
that-
bunch of his videos. He did a talk. He did a debate with Cosmic Skeptic.
Okay.
I can't remember that YouTuber's
Because I like
real
Stephen
name,
Hicks
but
a lot, and I know he's an
I know. Look, I
objectivist,
love
but I've never heard
Stephen
him
Hicks
actually.
is great. Yeah,
I've never heard him actually talk about objectivism. So it was
right.
weird because I know when I made that tweet last week about I don't remember exactly what I said. It was something about how like woke was like collectivist and they're anti-liberalism and anti-individualism, and there's like two people that I like completely don't know what the fuck they were talking about that like started getting like very angry and arguing with me about how like how dare I invoke individualism without reading Ayn Rand? And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? You think Ayn Rand created the concept of individualism? Like what the fuck? This is like insane to me. So
Stephen Hicks actually did a debate with the guy that I can't remember his name because I watched that afterwards. It's a super fascinating debate on whether or not Ayn Rand's philosophy was more like an art that you couldn't change, or it was some sort of scientific thing that it was evolving over time.
interesting.
Yeah, it was fascinating. Look, I'm warming up to the philosophies. I wish I knew, like even here, the Andrew Wilson, who I don't think is some sort of philosophical mastermind. A lot of times these Christians, they just learn enough philosophy to make some kind of argument in favor of theism. There is like the school of rationalism, I think, is at odds with the school of empiricism. And empiricism, obviously, when somebody says like this, we know this empirically, it means that we have evidence. Like empiricism basically makes the argument that you have to have evidence from the natural world from multiple lines of competing evidentiary studies in order to know anything, right? That's science is basically based on empiricism. But rationalism is this idea that you can just sit around and think of things and find truths about the universe. So I am much more an empiricist than a rationalist. And both of these are obviously schools of philosophy. So when you just say, oh, philosophy proves my point, I always think, well, do you mean empirical philosophy or rationalism, right?
Well, it's kind of like I haven't listened to enough of Andrew Wilson stuff to know if this is the pathway he goes, but it's kind of what you're talking about is the Darth Dawkins thing where
Yes.
you have essentially like a lot of people, most people probably, they walk around the world and they're not really thinking about like, well, if I keep trying to get to the root of my belief system, I'm going to eventually get to a place where I believe something on faith, on some sort of faith claim. Like I don't 100% know factually, why I believe this thing or why I accept that this is the good way to live. I've just kind of, been taught this basically by your society has taught you, has instilled this value in you, and you kind of just accept it. And most people, I guess, just don't think about that or realize that. And I feel like when you talk to like the Darth Dawkins types, like the entire conversation is just them trying to get you to acknowledge that and then saying, well, because you acknowledge that your belief system is based on some sort of faith claim, then I win the conversation because mine is based on some sort of faith claim, but my faith claim is that there is some sort of perfect God out there telling me what to do. And yours is based on something stupid and poopy. And you're like, okay, well, great argumentation there, but
yeah, that's a suppositionalist Christian argument. Yeah.
right.
Look, and somebody in the chat is saying, Adam, stereotyping Christians again. It's not, obviously it's not all Christians. Like there are some science loving Christians out there, right? This is more I would call it more the authoritarian types where they're like my way or the highway, which I would categorize Andrew Wilson and Darth Dawkins as those type of Christians, right? They're really I really question their love of Christianity. It seems like they really just want to use Christianity to win arguments, which I'm more in the school of Jesus was a hippie, right? Look, I'm always talking about forgiveness. Forgiveness, right?
Yeah.
It's about forgiving. Do you look at Andrew Wilson? Look, I've listened to my share of Andrew Wilson content. And it's hard for me to imagine that this guy is a very forgiving person. But I mean, I could be wrong.
I definitely also see Jesus when you read the Bible. Seems kind of, he gives you the hippie vibe. He definitely gives you the lefty vibe when you read that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, he whipped the money changers and all that stuff, but hey, he still seemed to be hanging out with all the degenerates and forgiving them.
Yeah.
Can get into that in a second, but to finish my point, okay, based on this, we kind of suspend them all the time and then kind of pretend like we don't. We let cops be judge, jury, and executioner in many moments and kind of excuse them from it. If there's something which is going on that's in such a state of emergency, we'll suspend the constitutional rights of people in a moment's notice. We'll send the Japanese to internment camps. We will do all of those things because we've done it. We'll suspend your constitutional rights in a second if we think we need to, which, by the way, that would be my argument for how I know rights aren't real anyway. But we will, and we just kind of excuse it.
But
So again, it feels like there's this sort of conflation about whether a concept is real and whether like whether the enforcement. He's saying like if something is not enforced 24/7, then it's not real,
Right.
right? He's saying like, oh, you can't, like, gravity is always enforced, so therefore it's real. This concept of natural rights is not always enforced, therefore it's not real. And I would say, the people that advocate for natural rights, they're not saying that. They're just saying that there is this concept. And I kind of like don't really agree with this, but I think the argument is essentially that there's this concept inherent in nature that if you look at it, and define something the specific way, you say, okay, well, whatever rights, whatever a creature, a living creature can basically do without infringing on another person, like that is its natural rights. It doesn't really matter if something is preventing from doing it. It doesn't have that right anymore. It just means something's infringing upon the right.
But they even caveat it. Like people do infringe on other people's rights. That's how the natural world works. And look, to some extent, I mean, gravity is a perfect example, right? Gravity is enforced by a natural law of the universe, right? So natural rights are to some extent a social construct, obviously, because they aren't enforced by some sort of natural law. The thing though that I would argue though is, I mean, if you say, human life is the measure of these moral systems, then there are going to be better ways of producing moral systems and less not as good ways to produce moral systems, and that is going to be a natural property of the world.
100%, yeah. But it's all like a Sitch's law thing of like trying to define it, because like you can define natural rights. It is a social construct in that it is just a thing where you say, okay, I'm taking a base of actions. And, it's these things a creature could do or needs to do in order to survive, or, however you define it, as long as it's not infringing on another person. You're just taking like a collection of actions and you're creating a wall around it. And you're saying, I'm categorizing these collection of actions as natural rights and saying,
Right.
Therefore that's the prescription. These should be things that a human is allowed to do. And it's like, okay, I mean, yeah, it is a social construct from that area, but it is sort of, I guess it's inherent. I don't know. I guess I also get tripped up in sort of thinking about it as inherent too, because it does feel just like it's just a categorization thing.
Yeah. A categorization error.
It's not really an error. It's just a way of defining something.
Right.
There's a correction here. Government enshrined protections are not real. Rights that as we know them, are just things that we recognize as things of value to us. So for instance, I usually define it as simply, you have a right to speak freely. If you're in the middle of the woods and you're buck naked, you can say whatever you want. You have a right to keep and bear arms. Pick up a stick, sharpen it, pointy stick, you can defend yourself. Ain't no one going to stop you. The question is, when you get into conflict with someone else, where is that line drawn? So the reality is, rights are recognized as things that we can and must do to survive and maximize potential.
I think rights are force, and I think that...
You think rights are force?
Government
rights are
protections.
What do you mean rights are force?
You're talking about government protection.
No.
It just triggered a whole libertarian
of course,
complex there. What? Force? Is someone using force here? Oh my God. See, this is the contradiction. They're like,
Yeah.
without that wall of force surrounding the libertarians, like their lifestyle doesn't exist, and none of them will acknowledge it. None of them will acknowledge it, and
That
that's
is
what's
true.
so.
Yeah.
Because they want to. They're complete utopians. They want to believe that wall of force doesn't exist because it's ideologically inconvenient, right?
Right.
The real world doesn't give a fuck about your natural rights. Okay? Man is a wolf to man.
And,
People out there
itself.
want to subjugate you, and they don't believe in this, oh, we can't use force on other people. No, they contemplate how to effectively use force on other people. That's what the entire military is about.
Well, and I think what Tim and other people who are trying to argue this natural rights or this kind of like libertarian idea against someone like Andrew Wilson or someone on the left, you know, because they usually make these social construction arguments, people get tripped up in trying to, like, they almost buy into their frame. That's what's kind of interesting is that Andrew Wilson is going along sort of this leftist deconstruction route, which Tim rightfully calls out, but he can't really articulate it properly, which is it's a complicated thing. So I understand why he's having trouble articulating it. But is it just instead of giving into the frames, just say, or actually maybe it is to give into the frame more and just say, you are correct. It is a social construct. It is a social construct that's created America, the best country on the face of the earth. So get fucked. I don't care.
Yeah. And if you don't like that.
Yeah. Pound sand.
If you don't like us spreading our freedom across the globe by force, maybe
yeah,
you
there
should
you go.
Fucking
get a better system.
Look, this is funny because Andrew Wilson's like, that's like the tree hugger position. No, I guess the libertarian is more the tree hugger position. So,
yeah.
No, I'm talking about period. I'll explain what I mean. A right to me is an entitlement absent duty. That's a right. Okay, you're entitled to it, but you have no duty.
And this is just, I don't buy into this at all. This is totally ridiculous because if you have a right to freedom of speech, you have a duty not to prevent other people from speaking their minds, not to engage in cancel culture, all that kind of stuff. So you do have a fucking duty. Like, just because you're not willing to acknowledge that duty, Andrew, you still have the duty. Look, you're a giant hypocrite.
I see what
if you say, I want freedom of speech, and then you go out there and say, you shut up, you can't say that, fuck you, cancel you, cancel culture.
No, yeah, right. You are correct. I think what he means that I don't think he's referring to that though. I think he just means in terms of like, you have a right, you have an entitlement to speak, but you don't have to speak. I think that's all he means.
Yeah, but that's he's looking in the wrong place for the duty. The duty still exists, and he's only not looking there so he can make this dumb argument.
Well, I think the real reason, now maybe I'm being a little conspiracy brained here, but I would guess, even though it's like the way he's defined this, I do agree with that is a technically true definition. Usually when someone brings up the word entitlement in a political conversation, it's almost brought up as something beyond a right, like entitlement you have a social security check, like that's your entitlement, right? That's kind of how a lot of people in the political realm think of entitlements. They think of it as like the government giving you like a check or some sort of a benefit outside of a natural right. And so,
but you have a duty to pay Social Security.
I know. Forget the duty aspect. Okay. Just focus on the word entitlement. Because I think, maybe I'm being a little not charitable here to Andrew, but I feel like he chose, even though he's correct, I feel like he chose the word entitlement to intentionally trigger him and the other people at Timcast because when they hear entitlement, they're going to immediately think of like government giving you some money or something, government giving you a check, government giving you something, which they always argue against that. So in their mind, they think a right and entitlement are opposite.
Right. Anything that you think of as a right, you can always trace back to some kind of duty. I think fundamentally he's wrong to make this assertion. Like what right do you have that doesn't have a reciprocal duty?
Well, he's only looking at half of the equation, as I said.
Yes, but he's making a statement that there are these things that exist, rights that you have no obligation on. And I'm just like, what are those things? And then
Looks
eat
like-
all the look. We'll watch all the examples because all the examples there's a duty to every single
no-
one of them.
No, like you, if wait, if you say you have a right to speech or a right to bear arms or whatever, that means that you have the right to do the thing, but you don't have to do it.
Yes, but the
don't-
duty is not to take away other people's firearms.
I
That's
understand
the
that.
duty, not to
understand
own
that.
a firearm yourself. The duty
understand that.
is to live in a society where people have the right to bear arms. That's the duty. You got to
Right.
put up with it,
I agree. I agree.
right?
Yes.
But then he like says, "Oh no, that means the duty would be if you had to own a firearm."
Well, no, I don't
Well,
think
no,
anyone.
it's not.
I don't think any of them bring up that.
Oh, they
element
do.
that you're
They do
talking about.
specifically. Yeah.
Okay.
George Lakoff writes an entire book on this topic of rights
Hmm.
and duties. And
Oh,
look,
okay.
he goes through a ton of them and he's like, I'm like, wow, yeah, look, everything can be traced to a duty.
Yes. Yes.
Look, you
Does that
you
mean-
can
it means
believe
that you have-
people shouldn't have freedom of speech, but that's because you don't want to abide by the duty to let people speak freely.
So like, okay,
Entitlement to speak.
yeah. So if you have a right to own a gun,
To speak.
no, hang on, let me finish. If you have a right to own a gun, do you have a duty to own a gun?
What is it? But
Well, no, but you have a duty to go to school where someone could walk in and shoot up the school, right? That's what the whole debate is over.
do you have a duty to speak?
No, you don't
start
have a
with the
duty
First
to
Amendment.
speak.
If you have a right to vote, do you have a duty
So
to
you-
vote? The
so
answer
right,
is
so
yes.
it'd be an
that's
entitlement.
your argument.
It's an entitlement
But
absent a duty.
but you can speak.
You have the duty to accept the outcome of the election. That's for sure.
Yeah, you can.
And so
Until you
the-
can't.
The question
Until somebody stops you with force.
So you're talking about government restrictions are made up by us as a people.
Just people can adhere to your rights without any form of government. If you're walking down the street and you speak, and a guy turns around and smacks you in the mouth and breaks your jaw, right? He has now used force against whatever this right you think you have to speak. You have no right to do shit except whatever you can enforce.
Right.
Your mechanism is force, and the mechanism against you is force.
And so-
all rights are force.
You're talking about government protections, not rights.
No, I'm talking about rights. What is a right?
So
What is
it is an intrinsic moral function
Well, okay,
or
intrinsic meaning what?
it means if again I'll try to explain. If you're born and you live in the middle of the woods, there are things you can do. You can hunt for food, you can defend yourself, you can speak freely. Now, what we've done in the United States
Unless
is
you're born blind and you can't talk, right? Then where does your right to speak come from?
you lack the ability to speak,
Right.
but you still have the means by which you are allowed to do it.
Yeah, but what makes it an intrinsic right to be able to do? Like, where does this idea come from other than you axiomatically kind of just
Evolution?
say, you say because I can do something, I have the right to do something?
It's part of a evolutionary biological structure
So
that
if I-
resulted in the survival of humanity.
So if I like grab a spear and I can,
It's interesting, like the technique that's going on here, which is that Andrew Wilson is saying something which is true, and not even necessarily like it's not a crazy thing because
It's
all
not
beliefs.
contentious.
It's not really contentious. Yeah, that's like the word I'm looking for here because all belief systems at the end of the day come from some sort of axiomatic belief. If you keep, dividing it down to get to the root of whatever the belief system is, because no one has perfect, divine knowledge of anything. And so, but the thing that's interesting is that so he's saying something that shouldn't really be contentious, but he's using the word axiomatic, which I'm not sure everyone's kind of tracking in the course of the conversation necessarily what he means by that. And then he also says it with kind of a condescending tone of voice.
Why?
And so it like
So
makes you
smug.
think like, well, I have to fight this. It's like I have to fight what he's saying. It's as opposed to being like, okay, I mean, you're right, but so's everything. So I don't understand what the point is of the conversation.
Right. Look, obviously, a duty is something that's done by compulsion. But even in the example that he gives out, the guy comes up, smacks you in the jaw, right, for speaking, right? He's not
Right.
taking away your freedom of speech, right? Because the police are going to come by and they are going to incarcerate him for assault, right? He is the one being compelled to let you speak. He has a duty to let you speak. And that duty is going to be forced on him by the police, right?
Right. Well, you get into this really obnoxious Sitch's law definition of like,
Yeah.
Well, I mean-
Over duty. What is duty?
well, no,
Yeah,
but even
exactly.
like, well, at that moment, he's preventing you from speaking. And it's like, okay, but like on a
Oh,
a
yeah, yeah,
longer
yeah.
time scale, right? If he gets arrested. So it's just
Yeah.
that's why I find these conversations obnoxious, sort of.
Look, and even the fact that he's getting incarcerated for, failing to meet the duty. Now his speech is going to be taken away from him, right? I don't think you get freedom of speech if you're incarcerated.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah, the
Well,
prison
therefore,
is
it's not an
not going to
actual right,
protect.
Adam. Oh,
Yeah,
checkmate.
look, I buy into the fact that you have the rights that you fight for,
Right.
that you have some institution protecting.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the rights that you have. And this
Yeah.
idea, look, I agree that if everyone believes in God, and God is going to get very pissed off at you if you don't obey these rights other people have, then that's a very good, inexpensive enforcement mechanism, is it not?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's still force.
Fondue for $5 says, "Oh God, I know I'm going to get triggered by this conversation. I view rights much like mathematics. They don't stop existing just because tyrants can't count." I don't know if I would agree with that comparison, because like to me, what is like mathematical principles exist in nature and are rules that like reality conforms to math. And then the numbers that we create are just like symbols to represent this set of rules
Right.
that
Yeah.
explains how reality works.
Yeah.
Rights is
like
a little
4
different.
apples, we take away 2 apples, now we have 2 apples, right? We're
Right.
just substituting symbols for something that's actually taking place in the natural world.
Right. And you can't, like, it doesn't matter what society you live in, it doesn't matter what Lysenkoists, communist government you live in, you can't really change the rules of math because
No.
reality is going to win out at the end of the day. Now, I guess the only way to make that comparison work, I guess, is once you set in the goal and say, okay, the goal is to create a society that maximizes individual freedom and allows people to prosper and live healthy lives, blah, 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 then you could say, okay, well, maybe you can kind of equate to math and saying there's some sort of objective mathematical / rights way of getting to that society. But on its own, I don't think you can say rights and math are the same thing.
There's another huge problem that a lot of the libertarians have because they don't want to perceive the state having any useful function. So when I say those rights are being protected by the state, they just obviously are super triggered by that. So, but I don't understand how their position that you could just dissolve the state and people will naturally abide by all these quote unquote natural rights is just not defund the police on the right.
Well,
like, how is that any different?
Well, I mean, if you believe that if you just got rid of all the state and everyone would behave according to natural rights, then that's absurd. I don't know if that's, I mean, I haven't really heard that many people. There's some people that believe that. I think it's silly. I don't think the majority of people, I don't think the majority of libertarians believe that.
Right.
It's just, again, it's just figuring out a category of behaviors and then circling it and saying, okay, I'm defining this as natural rights. That's all it really is.
Right. Yeah.
Stab somebody with it, I have a right to.
No, that's
why?
That's attacking
different.
somebody. That's violating.
Yeah, but other
that's a
than
whole
an
bunch-
axiom of you shouldn't do that because I just don't feel like you should, what makes it intrinsic that I don't do that?
that you don't go and kill another person.
Yeah.
So the way I view rights would be things that, and again, there's a debate over what rights are.
Yeah, let's start with that. What are they?
No. So there, it's honestly difficult to define,
Yeah.
but it is certain moral structures or.
I would
things
say
that are-
axioms. Would you agree with that? Just an axiom. So, like, you have inalienable rights from God according to the Constitution. This is an axiomatic principle. It means this is our like philosophical starting point. Is that we have these.
I would put it as things that were required or greatly beneficial to the survival of an individual that we greatly benefit.
I agree.
Right,
I agree. We
it's-
benefit. I just don't know what makes them intrinsic or like you're born with.
Well, see, actually, Tim could be getting off on a correct line of argumentation here if he were to say, well, these natural rights are what creates society that creates a society that benefits or creates, how should we phrase this? Creates a society in which humans thrive, the greatest. amount, and then he would have to define what thriving means, right?
Right, and that would be the proof of, so it wouldn't be an axiom. It would actually have proof. It would be grounded in some sort of proof. Like this behavior will make society fall apart and this behavior will make society thrive, right? That is
Right.
the proof.
And that's sort of and that would be the way kind of to argue this, because what you're doing is you're shifting the axiom from natural rights to thrive, right?
Right. Of
That would
course.
maybe be sort of the shell game way to sort of deal with this issue.
So I looked up axiom just since they keep talking about it. For logic, it is a proposition that is not susceptible to proof or disproof. Its truth is assumed to be self-evident. So like we said, we don't necessarily think that ties into the conversation, because the proving of whether or not it's, murder should be illegal is in how it affects society, right? If you have a society where people are allowed to kill each other indiscriminately and that society falls apart, you've got some evidence that that's not a good way to run a society.
Right. Well, yeah. So the way it would work is if you're talking to your philosophy teacher and you say, murder is wrong. And they say, well, why is that not an axiomatic belief that you just think murder is wrong? And then you respond at them, well, if you have a society in which people can murder each other, it's not going to be able to succeed. And the people in the society are not going to be able to thrive in a good way. And then it's like, okay, so that's not axiomatic, but then it shifts it to the axiomatic belief is, well, why do you think it's good for people to thrive in some specific way? Or why do you think it's good for society to exist? And and it's true that that's an axiomatic belief, but I feel like once you get to that part in the conversation, it's like, okay, well, then the other person looks kind of silly, because it's like, well, we all seem to agree that this is, we want to live in a society where people can function,
Well, then you kind of break down into utilitarianism, where you're like, is
Right.
a society where more people are thriving better than a society where a few people are super thriving at the expense of all other people? And everyone's
Right,
like, yeah,
right.
why can't we have that society, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but at least that argument is more tangible, right?
Right. Well, again, that's what, and I think Tim and other people that talk about natural rights, they make a mistake when they allow to get hung up on the axiomatic claim of natural rights, as opposed to just shifting it to the axiomatic claim of what do you think society should look like overall.
Which is
So-
all of our political discussions are based around that. All
Yes,
of them.
Of course.
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Right.
Or something like this, other than we just kind of agree to it.
So I think the restrictions we kind of agree to. And some people might view some things as rights and other things not as rights. Like the left thinks healthcare is a human right, which makes literally no sense.
No sense.
But in terms of your ability to speak, you can walk around, you can speak. To defend yourself, you can pick up a stick, you can defend
But
yourself.
this goes back to the same argument. I can grab a spear and murder somebody. I can do that. Why don't I have a right to do that?
Because you are now causing harm to another person, which is a detriment.
But why is that valuable?
Why are other people valuable?
Yeah, well, why would that be an intrinsic value? So, like, I can
One would
envision a
result in the
planet,
end of
for
humanity,
instance-
and one results in the expansion of humanity.
Look, he gets it.
Yes.
Ding, 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 ding,
Yes.
ding. That's exactly the case right there.
Yeah,
One is going to cause a society to grow and thrive and take over resources and members, and one is going to make the society into North Korea,
Well-
just withdrawing from the world.
This is, I've only listened to like 3 or 4 Andrew Wilson conversations, including this one. This is why whenever I listen to him talk, I don't like the way in which he engages in these conversations, because he's basically like, you're correct. Tim said something which is like the correct answer in terms of having the conversation move to the next level. But because Tim maybe doesn't have a background in philosophy or whatever, he's not using the exact correct language to force Andrew Wilson to acknowledge it to move to the next level of the conversation. So Andrew Wilson will sit there and pretend like he's not, like Tim isn't saying anything that's valid, and he's just going to keep asking the same question because Tim doesn't know the magic words, even though Tim is bringing forward a concept that we all sort of agree with, and that would naturally move the conversation forward if you were being, even remotely charitable in the conversation.
Yeah, this is why all of these contentious conversations end up like this. Like they're in a collaborative conversation, you would pick up on that and try to move the conversation forward. This is not a collaborative conversation. This is like, I'm going to prove Tim Pool wrong on his show.
Right.
And Tim,
exactly.
why would you sit behind the floaty alien spaceship when you're having this conversation?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Move that thing. You look like a nut.
Well, no, both can result in the expansion of humanity.
Right, but
Oh, I did the jump forward.
Would that be an intrinsic value? So, like, I can
one would result in the end of humanity, and one results in the expansion of humanity.
Well, no, both can result in the expansion of humanity.
Right, but absolutely not. You're completely wrong.
No, I'm completely right.
You are.
This is the authoritarian position I was talking about here. Like, if you go out and kill your enemies indiscriminately, that can result in the expansion of humanity. That's basically the argument.
Well, I don't know what argument he's making because he doesn't really say. You could also interpret it just like, well, if there's a tribe of barbarians that are not living according to natural right policies and indiscriminately killing their neighbors, and so you, the tribe of people that are living according to the principles of liberalism, pick up your spears and you kill like the bad tribe, you've expanded, the thriving capabilities of all humans worldwide, the natural right capabilities of all humans worldwide by going and killing those group of, cave people.
Yeah, but the Chad move would be to convert those people philosophically, and then you double your numbers. You don't kill them.
Sure, but it's
yeah,
not
look,
always
if you can,
possible.
obviously, look, if you can, yes, the natural world is always set against us in our objectives and goals. But look, I would argue this is why religions became so powerful, because they were like, look, instead of killing all of those people, we can make them join us. We double our numbers instantly.
I mean, you're correct, and that's an interesting way to look at it. Is the power of religions, especially religions that proselytize, is it's trying to turn enemies into friends.
Yes, totally. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
See, the Jews really fucked up by not being a religion that proselytizes.
I know.
Big mistake.
I know.
Wrong. Self-defense can result in expansion of humanity if you're using destruction for the purpose of ending something that is destructive. But if you are wantonly going around murdering people, you're actively reducing and harming humanity.
So listen, I mean, Tim is actually making a lot better arguments than I recall when I first watched this conversation. He's hitting all these points.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And it's like he runs a political show. This is what we talk about constantly. Like,
right.
When you are talking about where to draw the line in abortion, you're talking about, well, how is that going to affect society, human thriving, right?
Well,
where should we talk about
most people don't talk about abortion from that concept. So
right, yeah, because they have an intuitive gut. They're thinking of it purely from an individual perspective.
Yeah,
look, all of these moral intuitions that we have are basically us just checking our gut on how this will affect society. Until those changes are implemented, you don't really know, right? Who is correct.
Well, it makes sense that people are looking at it from an individual perspective because America is a highly individualistic society, which I think is a good thing.
Right.
So that's why people, I think, frame it through that lens, even though the kind of irony is that the moral framework is really based around the group anyway.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't expand humanity by harming people. There's
so
nations
the argument
that do
of
this
self-defense
all the time.
is there are things that we believe we must.
He's like, there's nations that do that all the time. What do you think he's thinking of?
I don't know. I mean, I would have asked for
Russia,
an example of that. Yeah. What does he mean by that?
Russia?
Russia.
Yeah. Going into Ukraine.
I don't know what he means.
Shipping all their people. Aren't the Russians doing this? Shipping all the kids back to Russia? They're like, look, we'll take these people. These ones are young enough to indoctrinate with our philosophy. These are easy marks.
Be able to do for the betterment and survival.
If those kids have natural rights, how come Russia can do that, Sitch? How is that possible? To do that horrible thing to those Ukrainian children. Sending them back and letting them be raised with Russian families. Oh, your parents died.
Survival of humanity.
Yeah, but when I'm asking you this question, right, I'm asking the foundation from which you say, I have the right to speak or write.
We need to be able to in
like
order to survive.
You because you need to do something. So I'm not sure how that means you have a right to it, though.
Okay, so speech is not
like you
just
have to
saying
eat.
words.
You have a right to eat?
Yes, 100%.
Really? You have a right to do that?
Why would you
Yes,
not
you don't have a right to own.
So
food,
if I have,
but you have a right to eat, otherwise you'll die.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Do you have a right to breathe? What about breathing?
These are good questions. Right?
Again, I don't think you understand. We're talking about intrinsic behaviors that are required for survival versus the government and humans deciding what we shouldn't have.
I don't think
laws.
we're speaking past each other. I'm asking what makes them intrinsic. When you say I have a right to eat, okay?
If you don't, you'll die.
If you have if that guy has all the food over there, you no longer have a right to eat.
We're not talking about your right to steal from others. If you are standing
no longer have a right to eat?
If you are standing in the woods by yourself, eat that mushroom.
Okay, got it. You can eat the mushroom. But what makes it a right to eat that mushroom, and what makes it not a right for guy standing next to the mushroom to say, I have a gun and I don't want you to eat that mushroom?
You're now once again talking about laws and restrictions.
Yeah, okay, but my whole theory is that rights themselves are force, and that's all they ever are. It's just your ability to use force to do thing you want to do.
I think you're just making
you call that a right.
I call rights things that.
That's where he's correct. Unfortunately, I hate agreeing with Andrew Wilson, but he's exactly right.
What?
That rights are force. The rights that we have are all rights that are procured through force.
Yeah, but wait a minute. See, I don't agree with him because he's conflating the concept of the thing with the enforcement of the thing. And those are two different things.
Right.
So a right is, as he said, an entitlement absent duty, or as you say, an entitlement that requires
with a duty. Okay.
With a duty, right?
We don't need to argue about that. But
yeah, right.
It's an entitlement.
Yeah, a right is an entitlement. ...
Right.
That is different from saying, well, in order to enforce the right, you need to use violence. That's a different concept. So then to say, well, rights are violence, that doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. But he said those rights that you have are procured through force.
Yeah, I agree with that. But then he
he's
simplifies
saying
it
that
down.
The rights are violence.
Right. Well, that doesn't make any sense.
That doesn't make any sense. You're correct.
The thing and the enforcement of the thing are two different concepts.
Right. Yeah. We're enforcing nonviolence through violence.
Right.
But you can't say that the nonviolence that we're enforcing is violent. Obviously, it's not, right?
Right.
That are essential to the survival of humanity.
Do you have a right to your heart beating and your blood flowing and to blink and to...
Yes.
Okay, so if you
now you misunderstand because once again, you're talking about government again.
How is this government? It doesn't need to be government.
If you are standing in the middle of the woods and your heart is beating, your heart has a right to beat. If your heart fails and you die, you died. If you're making an argument that someone should or should not be allowed to do something is an entirely human social construct.
I agree.
Right. I'm saying that the reason we have protections of rights is because we've determined certain things are required for the reasonable survival and expansion of humanity.
I agree. We agree to those things.
That was perfect.
Right.
It's exactly what's going on. Tim, A++.
And we act as though they're rights.
And the Bill of Rights.
But I don't think rights themselves exist.
The Bill of Rights is a recognition of certain things that we do for the betterment of survival that must be protected from government. Now, if you want to argue the...
See, I don't like what Andrew Wilson says because, like, he says just because the right is protected by force means it doesn't exist. Well, what the hell? We created the force to protect it. How does it not exist? It totally exists.
Well, he means exists in terms of exists outside.
As some sort of natural law? No,
yeah,
it doesn't
outside of
exist as a
humans.
natural law.
Yes,
It exists
right.
as a human law.
Right, right.
Yeah. But who cares? So
But
what?
that's-
It exists.
right. But that's why I think Tim and other people should just they need to give up on this natural rights sort of, I mean, maybe they shouldn't give up on it because it's a useful enforcement mechanism that I think society might need. So maybe they shouldn't give up on it, even if it's not true. That's why we say it's the useful fiction.
Well, if the non-aggression principle works on libertarians and the fear of God works on conservative Christians, like,
Right.
I'm cool with that, just as long as everyone's obeying the rules, right?
Right, right.
Look, and if the threat of incarceration works with atheists, like a different argument works with all of these different groups.
Right.
That's how society orients people into, or actually coerces them into not going and punching someone in the face because they don't like what they say.
Right.
Yeah.
amendments in the Bill of Rights are nonsensical, fine. If you want to have a moral argument or philosophical argument about what is required or intrinsic to the survival of humanity, by all means have that argument. But rights do exist. It just means some you might not agree with and some you might think aren't. Those are philosophical debates.
Yeah.
Again, Tim totally nails it. He's like, if you want to move the argument to whether or not these rights are going to be good for society, that's what we should do.
Right, but that's what I mean. I get annoyed with sort of the way that Andrew has a conversation. And as you said, it's not collaborative. Because if it's collaborative, then you say, okay, well, then we can move the conversation. Tim is moving the axiom to the thriving, what it means to be a good society. But since he's not using the exact language to say that, it kind of allows Andrew to just keep denying what Tim is saying.
Well, and it's a dead end for Andrew, because Andrew wants to make the argument that unless you believe in God, rights don't exist. Like, that's literally the argument he's trying to make.
Well, he could, I mean, even if he was being more collaborative, he could say, okay, Tim, what you're saying is that you're moving the axiomatic belief onto what the society should look like. And that's fine. And I can agree with you that we all have an axiomatic belief, everyone, on what society should look like. But then you have to acknowledge, Tim, that natural rights themselves are not inherent in nature. You're just saying that they're the best way to get to this society. And I don't know if Tim would agree or disagree with that. But
interesting. I wonder.
When you say exist, right? Do you mean outside of your brain they exist, or do they only exist as a construction of your mind where you say, I have a right to do X?
If we observe creatures in the wild, we will see them required to do things to survive.
Yeah. Okay. So
if you inhibit those things, they will die.
So if rights
protect
to you,
those things.
So the rights to you just mean things which are a requirement for your existence?
And
yeah, don't go to nature, man. Nature's terrible, right? You've got some prairie mouse and a hawk drops out of the sky and denies him his right to breathe, eat, do it, reproduce, all of it, right? Don't go to nature. Nature does not make your argument.
And typically we define them as such because they transcend the basic obvious things like breathing and drinking water.
Owning a gun isn't a requirement to your existence.
No, defending yourself is.
Yeah, but
if a bear comes in the middle of the woods and you don't have the ability to defend yourself, you cease to exist and humans cease to exist. So humans do defend themselves. Then as human society, we've decided this should be protected, otherwise humans will cease to exist.
Yeah, but why? Okay, but this makes no sense, right?
Look, and if that's the rule, then pretty soon there's a pressure on you to own a gun. It's kind of funny because as crime rises, like more and more people feel a duty to own guns and protect themselves, because that is the social norm. So even that breaks down, this whole idea that you don't have a duty to own a gun. The environment kind of dictates that. It's funny.
So if all right is to you, Tim, is thing X which is necessary for the survival of a man, in this case blinking and breathing and eating and pooping and whatever, the right to poop shall not be under, because you have a right to do that because it's like something you need to do to be alive.
Right, but you can't poop on someone's floor.
Why couldn't you extend that to literally everything? You need healthcare to survive. You need guns to survive. You need a house to survive. You need everything to survive.
I think we should move on, but I think the challenge is, I don't know if you're unwilling to understand or what. You have no right to take other things from other people, to take their labor. You have no right to force a doctor to perform surgery on you, but you certainly have a right to ask him for it.
Those are just assertions. Like, you just assert these things.
I don't like going to the eating and stuff too, because it's also, these rights are about social interactions. They're really about how you behave in relationship to other people. And eating, and I mean, I guess there are some taboos around eating and stuff like that, but it's just not as tangible as interacting with other people.
Things as though they have a grounding epistemic.
I mean, even the eating thing, like for like religious, like kosher laws and things of that nature, it's supposed to be, whenever you add the religious stuff, it's, you're never alone. You're always under the watchful eyes of God.
Sure. Yeah, totally.
To take their labor. You have no right to force a doctor to perform surgery on you, but you certainly have a right to ask him for it.
Those are just assertions. Like, you just assert these things as though they have a grounding epistemic foundation from which you can make the assertion. Based on where do you make the assertion that you're not allowed to do X other than because Tim Pool's preference is that you don't?
Oh, I can answer that. The assertion is based on Tim hates government. That's where it comes from. Literally
Terrible.
where it comes from. You
Terrible.
agree, Sitch. Don't say it's you totally agree
Terrible.
with me. I know you do.
I mean, you're correct, but it's terrible.
And I'm literally saying you're talking about laws and social and
It's weird. I didn't watch the rest of the stream. So I don't know, like, was Andrew like this sort of dismissive and intentionally
Obtuse?
not obtuse, what's the word? Like he's like intentionally being, I don't know, just intentionally
Combative?
being rude
Oh.
to Tim here with
Smug?
these like, yeah, Tim Pool's preferences.
This is all
Like,
your preference.
Was he like this for like
You personally don't like murder.
right. Was he like this for the entire conversation, or was it just this one section about natural rights? I should watch the whole thing to see because I'm kind of curious.
I have no idea.
social order right now, not human behaviors for survival.
I think human behaviors are laws and social orders. I think that's this. You're saying the same thing.
No, if a person was in the middle of the woods, they'd be foraging and looking for food.
Yeah. What does that have to do with what I just said?
You're talking about what the government
human
can and can't do. I'm talking about what humans need to do to survive.
Yeah. Okay. Well, humans also have to have other humans around to survive.
And so this is communication is essential. The right to defend yourself is essential. The right to secure your possessions is essential. These things, without them, humans cease to function properly. And then you get the Soviet bloc, you get starvation, you get genocides.
It's
and
also
this is a
just
detriment to.
It's a function of our belief system in the United States that we have natural rights. I mean,
I agree with that.
That's a huge part of it.
I agree with that. I agree with that. That in the United States, we agree that
But
we
I think
have
that
them.
You can say, I think you can
Not
say that
sure that we
everyone,
do.
I think that you can say that everyone has these rights, and it's a function of whether or not their government allows the rights to be recognized.
That's the contention. When you
So-
say, I think everybody has these rights.
Yeah, that is my belief.
Yeah, it's a belief
Yeah,
based on
based on existence. I mean,
based on just
you know,
your preferences.
So there's.
I don't think it's a preference. I think everyone has a right to breathe. And
in the
live.
See, here's where we get, this is what totally triggers me because it's just based on your personal preferences. I mean, we have a lot of data on which societies thrive and which societies don't. My personal preferences don't even need to come into the conversation.
Well,
right?
it is your personal preference that you live in a society that's thriving and doing well, Adam. So, you know, it's based on your
Okay,
personal
yeah.
preferences. Right.
Oh my God, please make it stop. Yes, everyone's personal preference is that they want to live in North Korea,
Yeah, right.
or
right.
everyone wants to live in the antebellum South as a black person, right?
Well,
like
you
those
know-
are people's personal preferences. Get
Right.
out of here.
And this kind of came up when we were talking to Peter Boghossian briefly, because it's like, yeah, like if you know, if you want to kind of bring in the objective part of the conversation, like, okay, if you ask a person, hey, would you rather, you know, live in America, you know, would you rather live in America or would you rather live in North Korea, right? And, you know, everyone is going to say America. Is it really subjective at that point?
Right. Yep.
I mean, I guess there's a handful of people who get off on starving to death or being tortured or something. And maybe they would want to live in North Korea, but I'd be like, okay, I think that's the exception that proves the rule there.
I like to think of them as emergent facts because really it's where subjective and objective break down. It's kind of
Right.
like pricing, or, you know, we all collectively agree that an ounce of gold is worth a certain value in US dollars.
Mm.
That's like an emergent fact. It is a fact. I mean, you can go
Right.
to various exchanges and look up exactly what it is at a particular time, right? But it's not like a fact. It's not like an objective fact of the universe, and it's not really subjective either, right? I mean,
Right.
it's like a collective action fact.
So
Yeah.
I agree with this concept of emergent facts or emergent properties like prices, but
Yeah.
what does that have to do with the morality question? I guess?
Well, the emergent fact would be the societies growing and becoming larger and and thriving. Also what you said, where people, you ask 1,000 people and the vast majority of them would rather live in America than North Korea. That's like an emergent fact.
Mhm.
Even though you can say, oh, it's subjective, right? 10 people decided they wanted to live in North Korea. So those subjects chose North Korea, right?
Right.
And it's not objective because everybody, like, it's not a fact of the natural world that people want to live in America. But it is an emergent fact.
Okay, sure. I mean, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I think you could just say it's objective fact that people have a tendency, the majority have a tendency to want to live in some specific way.
You're saying a subjective fact?
No, it's saying it's an objective fact that
Objective
humans,
fact.
that
That,
the
yes.
majority of humans have a preference to living in a specific way.
Right.
The majority of humans will prefer to live in America than North Korea.
They could go down the time route though and argue against you. They could say, well, that's objective to today, but look, in 1,000 years, all the people may hate living in America. They may all pick they want to live in North Korea then.
Well, no, well, no, if we're
Checkmate.
saying, well, no, because I mean, my response to that would be saying, assuming the society, like who knows what North Korea will look like in 1,000 years, obviously, or America,
Right.
but
It's
assuming
worse. It's
right,
even more terrible and they love it.
right, assuming things kind of stay the same in terms of like rights and freedoms and everything, that even over 1,000 years, that's not going to change. It doesn't matter, right? Like
Right.
if you could even like remove the country aspect from it and just be like, okay, if you ask, 100 people, hey, would you prefer to live in a scenario where you are a literal slave that has no agency and has to work backbreaking physical labor conditions from sun up to sundown, and you get very little food and very little water, and you have to wear rags, and you can't,
I
be
love
in a relationship with
rags.
anyone, or
I hate relationships.
yeah, or you have a situation where you have plentiful resources, you have a job that gives you some sort of mental well-being, and you feel like you're accomplishing something, and you have reproductive access to attractive partner of your choice and the capacity to raise a family, right? Like, who the fuck is going to choose the first thing? No one's going to choose that.
I'm a contrarian. I choose the first
Yeah,
one.
okay, exactly. Like, right, like no one's going to choose that unless
I don't want you to be right, Sitch. I choose the first one.
The only way someone would choose that is they already had a presuppositional belief beforehand about, I don't know, something like that. For some reason, that life, the horrible life, is a more moral life, and they'll be rewarded in the afterlife or something.
Oh,
like that.
wow.
Like that'd be the only way someone would go down that path. So does that mean that that's an objectively moral thing? Well, maybe you could argue, yes, from a human standpoint, that is a more moral way to live.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And you do. In the big picture of what are the list of fundamental rights that exist to humans, cultures debate these things wildly, but there are a small handful which are true and correct. If inhibited, a person dies.
Agreed. But what I'm saying, I guess my overarching point, and I can just kind of tie it off
society
with this,
fails.
is that when I say rights are forced, what I'm saying is the thing that you say is necessary, breathing, eating, these types of things. I think that those things, which you call rights, really are just force. You're saying I will use force in order to do this thing that I want to do to necessarily exist. And that another person can use force to stop those things from existing.
Yeah, you're completely right that he's conflating the two. Because really, most of it is the threat of force. Force really doesn't come into play much in society, fortunately, right? Because the threat of force is enough.
Well, he's either conflating them, or he's kind of, and maybe this is why Tim says he's doing the leftist deconstructive thing. He could be making the conflation argument, or he could be making the Jordan Peterson rebelling against God argument, in terms of that, yes, you could look at it that every aspect of life, is a type of force or violence. You have to live by stealing the energy from another living creature, whether it be a plant or animal. And so everything you do, your very existence is built upon, a throne of death and violence. But it's like, okay, well, that's the way it is. I mean, I get it, but
sounds so based. Very Klingon. I like it.
And then you can use force to stop them.
Right, and then you can use force, et cetera, et cetera.
Right,
but all we're really doing is just moving the goalpost of force around, right? So if this group says this group does not have the right to breathe, they do not have the right to eat, they do not have the right to do any of this shit, and they go and put a stop to it,
but
what are we appealing to for why it is that you can't do that?
That group doesn't have the right to do that.
Yeah, but that makes no sense.
Like
why wouldn't they have the right to do that?
I feel like
saying might make
fascism. How is this not? Look, it just screams fascism, right?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to know because all he's doing is just deconstructing the argument. He's not putting forward whatever his positive argument is. So I don't know what
look.
exactly it is that he's advocating for.
I'm afraid to ask what his positive argument is.
Makes right, which is a
Well, it's
perspective.
beyond that. I think you're making
It
a
makes.
postmodernist argument for why you should be allowed to do things that other people don't want you to do.
I think well, no, I think the opposite is true.
I'm making.
I would use a justification of God, and I would appeal to something which is unchanging and an unchanging standard for moral justifications for oughts. But what you're doing when you say a right and you're appealing to like the Constitution, that's postmodernist subjective standards of nonsense, right? It's just like
Okay, this is so weird. This is like, because usually I think when Andrew's talking, he's like right, but he's like sort of like doing some sort of, I don't know, maybe, I don't know if I want to use the word like linguistic trickery, but he's like sort of like, using terms in a very specific way. Like he's like, okay, he's like technically right, but he's kind of doing this thing. But this is just flatly 100% incorrect. I don't even understand it. Like, this is just stupid because all he's doing is he could sit there all day and say, Tim is making an axiomatic belief about natural rights, saying that rights are inherent in nature. And that's based upon, just nothing. That's based upon his own faith. And okay, you can say that, I guess, but then you have to bite the bullet and turn around and say that your belief in God is literally the same thing. You have an axiomatic belief based on faith that God exists and that God, and not only that God exists, but that your moral system of Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Islam, whatever it is, that you have an axiomatic belief that that is the correct, version of God. And then even within your own religion, that you have the correct, sect denomination of your religion. Those are
based
all
on no
axiomatic beliefs.
evidence.
Right. Based on no evidence whatsoever. So I don't know how I could sit here and say that his belief in God based on some sort of unchanging ought has some sort of less, or has a greater grounding in it than the axiomatic beliefs of natural rights.
Have you heard the term hypocrisy?
I have heard that term.
Okay,
yes.
well, that's how you can do it.
Okay. Now, he could make the argument that he thinks from an enforcement mechanism perspective that it's easier to enforce a society or to keep a society rigid and stable if they're adhering to an unchanging set of oughts dictated from some divine presence. You can make that argument, but that's a completely different argument than the one he's making right here.
Yeah, look, and I don't even think that argument holds to Christianity because so many of the Christians were motivated to get rid of slavery. They were still part of the abolitionist movement. So why
Right.
you have Christians on both sides of that argument arguing in favor that we need to radically change society? How is his moral framework unchanging?
Oh no, listen, I agree 100%. And I'd argue that, like, first of all, Christianity is not unchanging.
Yes,
Obviously,
of course it's
you're
not.
right. There's many denominations. In fact, the only reason I think Christianity is successful today and exists today is its capacity to change with the
Yes.
times. And this is sort of the fundamental problem with society and with philosophies in society, is that you need to have rules that are rigid enough to maintain the things that are good, but flexible enough to be able to bend when society, technology, environment changes without breaking.
Right.
So-
Dogma for now, but not forever, right?
Right,
You know, a little
right.
bit.
Yeah, exactly. So
Like
I
freedom of speech is kind of a dogma, but
right. So I agree with what you're saying. I'm just saying that he could at least you could make the argument. He could make that argument, even if you disagree with it. It's an argument that I'd say, okay, well,
Sure,
I
he
agree or
could.
disagree with it.
Yes.
I'm not saying that it's just like flatly, incomprehensible or flatly hypocritical.
Right. Yeah. He has this idea that he's standing on just a completely bedrock philosophical argument here that is completely not bedrock, very shaky. So,
Right.
which I think you agree on, obviously.
Yes,
So
yeah.
I'm interested.
No, it's moral.
we all
foundation.
decide.
Moral.
We all decided that we have these rights, so we do. There's no justification for any of them.
So
Zero.
you don't believe in any intrinsic moral foundations?
No, I do believe in intrinsic moral foundations and epistemic justifications and ontological justifications, which would come from God.
I think you're doing deconstructivist reasoning to argue why.
It's just basic philosophy. It has nothing to do with deconstruction or postmodernism. Basic philosophy, you have to have a justification for a position.
See, I wish we could get into the epistemology because He loves using that word epistemology, which is just like the justification for why you believe something, right? That's your epistemology. You and I lean towards science, materialism, that kind of stuff.
And
Andrew
we
Wilson,
lean heavily on evolution generally.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Andrew Wilson is not gonna. Well, I don't know how he feels about evolution, but like his epistemology seems to be. I read it in the Bible, right?
I guess. I mean, I don't know, but Tim is correct that he is using a leftist, generally a leftist deconstruction argumentation style, even
Oh,
though it's at
yes.
the service of something that is the opposite of leftism, which is
Right.
interesting. But we usually see now. I don't know. Maybe you can make an argument about, well, is it leftist? Definitionally, and I just say it's generally something that we see the left does primarily. So.
And when I've given you one, you just reject it every
yeah,
time.
well,
You just say,
because
nope,
because
nope.
they're axiomatic. So you haven't demonstrated why the axiom or the starting point. We start with rights, Andrew. You haven't demonstrated why we do, other than because I observe that if we don't act in this way, you expire. But it's like, okay, but why is that even bad? Like, why?
He did. He said it. He totally said it already.
Isn't it? It's funny. He literally makes the argument and then changes it mid-sentence. Like he's able to say Tim's argument, and then
Yeah,
he
look.
changes it. That was interesting. I didn't even notice this the first time I listened to this conversation. That's hilarious.
Why is that even a bad thing?
Why is it?
Wait. Let me go back. This is hilarious.
Position.
And when I've given you one, you just reject it every
yeah,
time.
well,
You just say,
because
nope,
because
nope.
they're axiomatic. So you haven't demonstrated why the axiom or the starting point. We start with rights, Andrew. You haven't demonstrated why we do, other than because I observe that if we don't act in this way, you expire. But it's
You haven't explained, how you explain how it's not axiomatic, except if you don't do the thing, you fucking die. Well, then okay. Well, then
it's bigger. Your whole society dies.
Right. But it's like, okay, so that means that the belief of the natural rights isn't axiomatic. That shifts the axiomatic belief to, well, why does it matter if you live or die?
It sustains society over time, obviously.
Right,
Look,
right.
he said it. You literally said it, dude.
It is pretty
it's
funny.
right there.
It is funny, yeah.
It's like, okay, but why is that even bad? Like, why is that even a bad thing?
Why is it bad that humans cease to exist?
Yeah, why would that even be a bad thing from the worldview of rights? Like, oh, okay.
Now he's like, he's looking at the perspective of the actual concept. He's like, but the concept, how does that feel about it?
Yeah, I know. And then you get this kind of stupid conversation where it's like, well, I like living. And he's like, well, is that just PSA Sitch's, preference that he likes living? I'm like, well, yeah. And it's also generally the preference of, 99% of the human population. Humans prefer to live. Oh, so it's just the preference of humans. Yes, it is the preference of humans.
And
that's what
all
we're talking about
animals.
here. We're talking about human society and the preferences of humans. Yes.
Yeah, so weak.
If you don't have this right, you die. But you haven't justified why that's even a bad thing.
Because humans exist through a pattern of evolution towards or creation, whichever you decide.
Wow, I forgot about that.
Okay.
Look, he even brings up the evolutionary argument.
Good for him.
Tim.
Good for
Fucking
Tim.
winning.
Yes.
It's so funny. So many of the Andrew Wilson stands are in the comments like, Tim just doesn't get it. He just doesn't understand.
Well, this is the trick. This is why it's annoying. The trick is if you don't use all the right terminology in all the right way, then all the smug internet, and I hate this word, but midwits will come into and be like, oh, you got totally destroyed. Though if you're actually listening to the concepts, which 99% of the people that comment on these things that are like, oh my God, you're so stupid. They don't actually listen to the concepts. They're just sort of like halfly paying attention to the conversation. They don't realize, no, like actually Tim's addressing all these things. He's just not using your preferred code words, your preferred technical language.
How can Andrew Wilson make any argument? If he wants to argue that letting abortion happen is going to destroy society, how can he make that argument if he is saying, oh, it doesn't really matter if society thrives or falls apart? What the fuck, dude?
I imagine he would say it's all rooted in because this is God's will. Like that's the axiomatic belief underlying everything. Like this is what God wants.
Okay.
Which,
Whatever.
I mean, okay, that's fine, but that's your axiomatic belief.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So look, he agrees. He's just being obnoxious. So he does agree that it's important for society to thrive. He's just being obnoxious here. He's like, yes, but you have to adopt my reason why society has to thrive, and not your reason. Your reason is terrible. My reason is I read the Bible.
I'm assuming, because otherwise, I mean, I don't think Andrew Wilson's a nihilist. So
Yeah. Well, maybe he is. Look, I think maybe he is a nihilist if you don't believe what he believes.
decide to be fruitful, to bear fruit, and etc. These things are components of creation and life. I think this aligns perfectly with like a Christian, Judeo-Christian moral worldview, and I think these things are requirements for the efficient expansion and fruitfulness of humans. So they are natural. Either from an evolutionary standpoint, humans developed to inherit certain requirements to function efficiently, and when these things are curtailed, we see inefficiency and collapse, disease, and chaos.
This is circular.
So he so fucking nails it.
I know.
Damn.
I know.
Wow.
He did find, yeah, because he said, well, if you want to talk about natural laws that exist outside of, social constructs, evolution is a natural, evolution
It
is
is
a
a
natural
natural law,
process
definitely.
and a natural law. And if humans evolved like all animals with this preference towards, reproduction and thriving, then that's a natural tendency, a natural law.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson talks about the evolution of politics and the fact that, two chimps can beat one alpha male. And as soon as you
Right.
start developing societies based on the numbers, right? The more people you have, the more power you have in the world, then all of a sudden the dynamic changes. It's not individual against individual, it's individual society against individual society. You've created
Right.
an entirely different metric. And just so obviously, well, except for in the movie 300, right? 300 men versus, what is it, like 10,000 or 10 million or whatever.
yeah.
Look, but even in that movie, they're saying, wow, the 300 people had such a based philosophy that philosophy could go against 10,000 men and destroy them, right? They are competing on philosophy. Yeah.
Right.
Look, and they're even arguing in that movie that free men fight better than slave men. That whole
Right.
movie is like a testament to that. It's amazing. Yeah.
So you go, okay, we need to bear fruit and multiply. Why? Well, because then we can exist.
'Cause God
Why do
said
we
so.
need to exist? Because then we can bear fruit and multiply. Okay, but why?
That's not what he said. He said we need to multiply because we evolved through nature to have that preference. That's not circular.
Right.
Because then we can
Okay,
exist.
you're just being contrarian for no reason.
No, it's not contrarian. I'm giving you a real
You
principle.
believe in God?
Yeah, I'm a
So
Christian.
if I say God gives you a mandate,
Christian.
so when God says has a mandate to be fruitful and multiply, do you say yes or no?
Yeah, of course.
Are there certain characteristics and behaviors that result in benefit and in more efficient, fruitful multiplying?
Of course.
Aren't the, so are
That's
those
divine,
that's-
but this is divine command. Justification from divine command has nothing to do with libertarian nonsense of constitutional egalitarianism.
I think instead of having a discussion on the merits of what rights might mean, you're instead upset over what libertarians think rights might mean, as opposed to what I'm actually trying to say.
Nails it. Fucking nails it. He's like, look, we both have the same moral framework. You're just pissed off about my justification. You're like, no, you got to use my justification or you suck. Like,
Well,
you
usually-
literally come to the same conclusion.
Right. Now I don't know if this is Andrew's argument, but usually like very far right conservative Christians who make arguments like this, it's kind of relies on the fact that they say, well, libertarian ideas in their mind is what allows the evil degenerate
Oh, good
leftists to
point.
come in and like destroy society
Good
because there's
point.
too much flexibility or too much leeway in people's behavior. So they want their stricter form of morality to come in to clean all that up.
Yeah, look, it's funny that the far right is using the paradox of the paradox of tolerance, right? Marcuse. We have to
I
be
guess you could look at it that
intolerant
way.
of some of this kind of
Right.
tolerance, right?
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. Look, this is why I disagree with a lot of the super far left atheists, the anti-theist types, the types that believe the world would be a better place without religion, because I do accept that a religious framework gives you justifications, brings you to a perspective that I think is pro-social and pro-society, right?
Mhm.
Obviously, it can go off the rails if you've got Andrew Wilson type saying, look, we need to go in and murder all these people because they disagree with us philosophically, right? Those are the things that you have to be aware of. But look, if you're going to get most people on board with a forgiveness attitude, a live and let live attitude, I should help my neighbor who is in need attitude, I think that's good for society. And if they do it through a religious framework, rah, rah, I'm in favor of it. And I think the atheists do us a disservice by kind of crapping on that mentality.
Okay, well, do you justify rights as coming from God?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, then we're fine there. But so I think we actually agree.
This is that. So is Temple a Christian now?
I don't know.
So
I have no clue.
he agrees. He's like, yeah, sure.
So then if that is the case, if whatever you think rights are come from God, then whatever else we're appealing to external to God for where a right comes from isn't really a right, right? It's not really a right.
I think that
Look, you can only do what God says is permissible. This is how he makes his argument against like homosexuality and stuff.
Mhm.
That's basically what he's building an argument towards.
life, goodness, creation, there is deep overlap. I think a simple way to look at it is, yin yang, within good there is some evil, within evil there is some good. And a way to explain that is sometimes we have to destroy to create. What does that mean? If there's a mass murderer who's murdering children, we don't want to, but we stop that person to defend ourselves and others' lives. I think that there is divine mandate that we must be fruitful, multiply. We are here to organize, to create. There's a secular way of looking at it. It's evolution that developed us into this point where we have internalized these things that we must do, or that result in a more efficient way of life. Or more simply, there is a God, there is a divine structure and mandate which results in certain things that are beneficial to mankind that I would describe as good and just, and there are things that are evil and unjust.
So as we get to the heart of it then, right here, where we come to this agreement, where I reject this, is that I think all the things you just stated are duties. They're duties, they're the opposite of rights. You have a duty.
I just think we're having a semantic argument.
Well, but semantics are super important so we don't speak past each other. So when I say a duty, it's an obligation to do a thing based on the fact that you're commanded to, in this case by God. A right, I would say, is an entitlement absent duty. So if that's the case, what you're listing out is like God is giving us these duties to do. I'm not sure what rights he's giving you.
I'm saying there are certain behaviors that God, that there are certain behaviors, there are certain...
Wouldn't free will be one of the rights granted by God?
Depending on what sect of or what denomination of whatever religion you believe in, I guess.
I mean, obviously, the whole moral testing this is the argument from a religious perspective why we have free will, because we have to be able to do evil. So obviously you're given the right to do evil or not do evil.
Right, unless you're, what is it? Who's the predestination people? The Calvinists or something?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's some people that believe in the predestination. So yeah, it's Calvinist.
functions of life that are a component of God's divine plan mandate. And I could argue it in a secular way for people who don't believe in God or whatever.
Sure.
There's a natural structure of the universe that says to humans, be fruitful and multiply. And these things are important for the efficient structure of such. That being said, we definitely should talk about, we'll talk about Diddy, but I do appreciate it. I thought that was fun.
It was fun.
But I love the philosophical discussions, but I think the audience is like, I want to hear about Diddy. Okay, so...
So true. So true. I love the philosophical discussions too, but the audience is just like, fuck this. Fuck this.
Here we go from the New York Post.
Okay, they're moving
That was
on.
it, yeah. That was it. But it was an interesting conversation.
I know. Look, I find it
I think
fascinating.
And yeah, Tim did way better than I recalled him doing in the conversation. So good for Tim.
Oh, yeah.
Good for Tim.
Just performatively not good because nobody understands it or acknowledged it in the conversation, which is just a debate tactic, right?
Well, so much of it is, as you said, the performance. Like if you have one person who's all like sitting there like making faces like everything you're saying is stupid, and the other person is like, Tim always has a kind of fast talking, nervous energy to the way he talks. So
right.
it sort of paints the conversation in one direction.
All right, this is great. I'm glad I got your perspective on this. Fascinating.
Yeah. M8566 for $2 says debate stream tonight. I don't know. We're not going to do like a post debate stream like tonight, right after the debate. We're going to talk about it tomorrow at the normal time. So
yeah, people can wait.
Yeah,
Nobody
I don't know if
cares.
people are super champing at the bit. People get mad when I say
Champing at the
chomping.
bit. I
Champing
know.
at the bit for that.
Everyone
Uh,
wants to hear you shit on
JD
oh my
Vance.
god, JD Vance. Spacing
I
on
don't
his
know.
name. Yeah.
I'm curious to see how the conversation goes because I think it's weird. I was listening to who was it? I'm trying to remember if it was Scott Adams or Pierce Morgan or someone who was all like, JD Vance is like the smartest person in politics. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like,
Really?
I don't think JD Vance is stupid by any means, but to say he's the smartest person in politics, that's a weird statement to make. So I am, but I think JD Vance is not exactly the most personable person around or the most eloquent speaker around. So I'm curious to see in terms of just rhetoric, who's going to do better, Tim or JD?
Both of them are black holes for entertainment value or charisma or anything.
Hmm.
Like I honestly think Trump is the only one in this campaign who's even remotely interesting. So
Um,
I can't listen to Kamala talk for long periods of time. Everything is so boring. And same with
mhm.
Walls and Vance.
I agree with you in terms of like the way that they speak, they generate Trump is the one that generates interest in the way he speaks.
Mm-hmm.
Kamala's interesting to me in terms of I don't understand what the fuck's going on with her. So I'm like more
Right.
interested on like a conceptual
Policy,
level.
yeah.
But yeah,
No, I
right. Like if
understand.
she listens, you're like bored to fucking death whenever she starts talking. So
I saw some clip of Trump, and Trump always does the thing with the chart that saved his life, which is
mhm.
so funny because it's like he just goes into this, oh my god, this chart, oh my god, I sleep with it. I make love to this chart. This chart, if I
Mhm.
didn't look, I wouldn't exist. It's this chart wasn't here saving
Right.
my life. And it is funny and very human. Like you understand, you're like, yeah, well, look, if that chart saved my life, I'd be fucking it too. Like, but
You're gonna get the
nobody else
blow up
has,
doll and you're gonna put the chart on the
yeah,
face.
look,
Yeah.
nobody
Right.
else has nobody in this race has anything that is remotely human or interesting or I can connect with at
Mm,
all. I do.
it's
I mean, I
interesting.
agree with you. And this is why we're covering Kamala so much is we're just interested in our policies. But I think I'm kind of resigned to the fact that Kamala's, we're not really going to know much about her. We're going to know what it is. And now I think she's like way ahead in the polls and stuff like that. So they're definitely going to they're going to keep it mysterious.
Yeah, it's weird because a lot of all the national polls are saying that I believe are saying Kamala is mostly ahead, even in some of the swing states. But then there was like this supposed leak, from the Kamala campaign that they were saying that they were behind in some of the swing states. So
Hmm.
I don't know. I
Oh,
don't know how
okay.
that's all going to play out. But
Right.
Filthy
Fascinating.
Casual for 792. Thanks so much. Says Adam just came up with my new homebrew D&D spell, Wall of Violence.
Oh,
I
yeah.
like it. That's a good one.
That would be good. I like the name.
Lucifer Doman for 2 Canadians says, quote, incentives drive culture. Adam Friended 2020.
So true. So
Yep.
true. We're
Anonymous
getting
Cow for $5
there's
says, having seen Andrew's debates, I will say he won't use his religion to counter arguments and uses internal critiques of the opponent's worldview. Yeah, because that's the way you do it. You say, oh, look, everything you're saying is based on a contradiction, right? You're
But
being a
how is that
hypocrite.
any different than the commies who don't have a positive worldview that they can sell to anyone? So all they do is deconstructionist shit on your worldview. It's exactly the same. It's fucking weak. Very weak.
Right, right.
Very beta soy cuck. That's what it is.
Oil King for $2 says, what is the difference between envy and jealousy?
Envy and jealousy. Well, there's some similarities,
Mm-hmm.
obviously.
I mean, is there a difference
Hmm.
between envy and jealousy?
Well, you can think of a difference in jealousy is the fear of like losing something that you have, and envy is the desire to gain something somebody else has. That's one distinction I can see, like immediately just on the surface of it.
Well, I mean, you can still I mean, I've heard people use the term jealous to describe something they don't have either. Like, oh, you're jealous of your neighbor's new car, right?
Right. But I think that, I mean, you could describe that as envy as well. So I
I
think
know you
jealousy
could.
is the
You
more
could.
popular term, and jealousy's kind of just taken over in all aspects.
Maybe I don't know what the
Like some
official
autistic
definition
person
of
might come
jealousy
out
is.
if you like if
Right.
you said I'm jealous of my neighbor's cars, I could see some autistic person coming forward and saying, "Well, actually, right?
Right. Right.
You're envious of your neighbor's new car. You're jealous that your wife might leave you."
It's funny. If you do the Google definition of jealousy, the first definition
Mhm.
says feeling or showing envy of someone or their achievements and advantages. So they're saying it's basically a synonym for jealousy. So
Yeah, look, I that's the way that I see it.
right. So
I
yeah, I don't
agree
know.
with that
I see if
perspective.
it's just a synonym. Let's see. Uh, Nigel TRC72 for £5 says, I don't think human rights exist in any objective sense. However, they are very useful concepts that produce a society I prefer to live in.
True.
True.
Yeah.
True, true,
I
true.
1000% agree. And that's the metric that you would judge them on, whether or not these rights are great, right?
Right. Oil King for $5 says, Adam, do you believe these social contracts are important? And have you guys ride a horse? Ridden a horse? Tim Fence.
I have ridden a horse. Yes, I don't know if Sitch has. I actually owned a horse at one point.
You
So,
owned a horse? I didn't
yeah,
know this.
yes. I had a horse, a
I
pony
don't think you ever
named
talked about that.
Spud.
That does
Yes.
sound familiar. Maybe you have talked
I have
about this.
owned a pony.
You okay? What was did you like? Why?
Why? Because
Yeah.
my folks had horses. So,
Oh, I didn't
yeah,
know
I had
that.
a horse. Yeah.
Wow.
Had to get up
Ride it
early in the
around.
morning and go
Yeah.
feed the horses. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot, having a horse is a lot of work. Yeah. Yes, I rode it around. Definitely. It was very fun. Yeah.
Oh,
But and what was the other thing?
well, let me answer the
Adam.
horse question first, and then we'll come back
Oh
to the
yeah.
second. So I have ridden horses. I did the Boy Scout Philmont summer camp where you have to ride a horse for a week. Essentially, you have to ride the same horse for like 6 to 8 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty that really gets rid of any fantasy you might have in your mind about horse riding is when you actually have to ride a horse for 6 to 8 hours a day. You're kind of done with the whole horse riding thing after that. So
Really? God, we
I
used
was
to.
very disillusioned on any horse riding after that summer camp.
So what? So it was like a camping thing. Like we would
Yeah.
get as a family get on our horses and go like on a 2-week camping thing where we would just take everything on our horses and we would go to the lake and we go fishing and camping and all kinds of stuff and ride the horses home.
Yeah, but that sounds fun because it sounds like what you're saying is you basically just use the horse to get to the location. You hung at the location, then you use the horses to get back.
Yeah, totally.
Right. Okay.
But
that
how's
would be
that
fun.
different?
No, what we did, like, oh my God, I don't even know why. This is like such a
They
stupid
make
way
you,
to set
they
up a
make
summer
you
camp.
get on the horse every single day.
Yeah,
Like,
because all you would do is
Oh.
you'd have to get from location to location. And so you have to wake up early as fuck in the morning, get on your horse. And by the way, you have to take care of all your horse and everything. You know, you have to clean its hooves. You have to do all the saddle shit, you know. You have to unbridle and do all that crap.
yeah, look,
And then
you
you
just
have
gotta
to go
ride bareback. It's so much easier.
well, I don't know about that, but and then you have to and then you have to let it go in some place where it's not going to run away. Obviously, they have like a pen or some fenced area, and then you have to go find it the night. You have to wake up early in the morning. You have to go find your fucking horse and not get kicked in the face by one of the horses or smacked around by one of the horses.
Yeah.
The horses are
Some
all
of them
assholes.
are mean.
Right? Yeah, the horses are all ass. There's like 30 of these horses, and some of them are fucking huge assholes, and they're gonna fuck with you. And then you have to, go get them. And then you have to go saddle up and you have to ride for 6 to 8 hours to get to the next campsite. You get there at like nightfall. You take all the horse stuff down, you eat your shitty meal that you have, and then you just do it the next day. So it's just like a really bad experience. I don't even know what the point of it was.
Sitch, would you develop a relationship with a horse? They don't kick and bite you and stuff. Well, unless you deserve it, unless you've done something mean to them, then they will rebel.
No, listen, my horse didn't try to kick or bite me. It was more of like when you're just wandering around and there's a bunch of horses in an area, you're just, like, you have to like make
Oh
sure you
yeah,
don't
totally.
spook them or something, or and even it's not even intentional. Sometimes they just move around and shit, and they're like giant creatures, and they're gonna try to smack you around by
Yeah.
accident. So
Stay out of the kick zone, right?
right, like the we had two people with us who were like our guides who were, been riding horses for a long time. And one of them got kicked in the face like by the horse, and they had to leave, and they had like a huge, like their face was all swollen and everything. It's because of someone's horse. The horses do this thing where they like to roll around in the dirt and the mud.
Oh yeah, to
Yeah,
clean
which-
themselves,
right, which people
supposedly,
don't,
right?
which most people, you wouldn't think that, because you wouldn't think of a horse like a dog, but yeah, no, horses, like, they roll around in the dirt. And so when they do, you have to try to get them like to get up, but it's kind of dangerous to be close to them when they get up, because they
Oh
like
yeah.
flick their feet around. And so the horse sort of just like is like flopping around as it's like on the ground, and the person trying to get the horse up, it smacks them in the face, so.
Yeah, when we were riding horses for, it's hard for me to remember how long a distance we were, but I mean, obviously
Mhm.
it's like 20 miles, 30 miles maybe, right? But
Right.
you'd ride them for an hour walking, which covered about a mile. And then we would
Mhm.
ride for like 5, 10 minutes at a gallop. And then we'd cover another mile. So that was kind of the routine. Walk a mile, run a mile, walk
That's
a mile,
but
run a
that
mile.
also seems fun too, and I think that's part of why this was not really that fun, is because there were very few places you could let the horses just go, and that
Uh,
is the fun part of the horse, is when it goes quick, isn't when it's going
Yeah.
fast, right?
My
'Cause we
mom
were in
and
like a
dad's
lot of like,
horse would like leap over tall tumbleweeds and shit. And I had like a little pony that would be,
Mhm.
it would have to be like weaving and dodging. So my
Right.
experience was like much different.
That's funny, because when we were doing it, like a lot of the trails that we were on were in forest or in mountains, and you're in
Right.
a line of horses, so you can't just like take off, which
Oh
is the fun
no.
part,
Oh my God.
is to run. Yeah.
It was like Gunsmoke where all the horses would just fan out and we would all just like gallop like stampede style. It was great. It was a lot of
Yeah,
fun.
I did go to some kind of ranch with family members after that, where we did ride horses, and it was like that, and it was way more fun. So maybe I should be kinder to horses. It was just that summer camp experience was set up in a very shitty way.
Yeah.
And then you're right. Obviously, if you have a horse that is yours and you have a relationship with it like you would a pet,
Yes.
you're gonna have a different experience with the horse. So
Yeah. It's like a pet you can ride.
right, and
Take
I'm
you
sure that's pretty
places
cool.
and shit.
Yeah, right,
It's your beast of burden, your slave pet.
right. And the second part of the question was: are social constructs important?
Of course. Yeah.
Sure. Well, when someone says social construct to me, I just translate that I just translate that in my mind to categories. Obviously, categories are important. So
Well, and I hate the fact that a lot of people have this idea that social constructs are arbitrary, which couldn't be
Right.
further from the truth. Like if you want to construct a society that's going to thrive, the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights cannot be arbitrary, for heaven's sakes.
Mhm.
Get the fuck out of here with that. That's ridiculous.
That's a good point. Yeah, people say, like, especially people on the left, they sneak in arbitrary when it never is arbitrary.
Yeah.
You might not like the reason for why it exists, but it's not arbitrary. So
Right.
Chad Summer for 11 months. Thank you so much. Says Matt Tahibi is streaming on YouTube these days. Get him on the show, Mr. Adam producer.
I'll work
sir.
on it. I love Matt.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah,
That'd be interesting.
that would be cool.
Ace for $10 says, Sitch and Adam, when are you guys going to do viewer call-ins? I completely disagree with you guys about morality, and I would love to talk about it.
Well, I mean, we can do them. Like, if you don't mind, Sitch, we can do them later in the week. I don't care.
Yeah, we can do it. Or you can come on, Ace. I mean, depends. I don't know how much we're going to talk about the debate, either tomorrow or if we spend it all talking about the debate on Thursday. So
It's a lot. I know it's super fun for the people who call in. It's not as much fun for the people who listen. Constantly, we get comments that are like, I don't want to hear. I tune in for Sitch and Adam. I don't tune in for whoever is on. So, and I do feel bad because a lot of times a person is kind of savage in the comments. So, but as long as you know what
Right.
you're getting into.
right. Ace for $10 says, I'm a moral expressionist, and I think morality is an expression of people's wants and desires for the world, i.e., when I say stealing is wrong, what I'm truly saying is I dislike stealing.
Yeah, and that sort of was cosmic skeptic's perspective, and I fundamentally disagree with that perspective. Yeah. So it's true that you are saying that you dislike stealing, but also a prohibition on stealing society wide produces a kind of society that's different if there's not that prohibition. And look, stealing is one that's not very contentious, but obviously slavery was very contentious. We fought a civil war over it. There are still places in the world where slavery exists, right? I would argue that a prohibition on people owning other people produces societies that are more productive than societies where slavery exists. And that's just like a fact of the natural world.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have you. Ace in the chat said that it's made of tough stuff. So yeah, we'll have you on either Wednesday or Thursday, depending on what the timing looks like.
Send me
Justice,
a DM though, so I can.
I think he sent me a DM.
Okay, well, let me know who it is.
The Justice 35 for $10 says the sophist versus the Russian stooge. I don't know who's dumber, Dim Fool or Andrew, who never engages on facts and is a liberal misogynist. He doesn't deny any of those assertions, by the way.
Well, I think that was a bad characterization of Tim Pool. I think Tim Pool did pretty good in this conversation. I do think Andrew Wilson is an illiberal misogynist, so I think that's accurate.
Oshacy for $20. Thank you, Oshacy. Says the issue I have with this debate is a conflation between two groupings of rights. Rights you naturally have, freedom of speech, and rights that can be granted to you, healthcare. I think there's an important difference.
Yeah, and we've talked about that a bunch. Like, well, you draw the line. How do they draw the line?
Well, no, here's I think the issue. And I think you have to be careful, obviously, otherwise you're going to fall into sort of the trap if you were debating someone like Andrew Wilson with the axiomatic belief situation, is that there is a categorical difference between a negative right and a positive right. So there is a categorical difference, a conceptual difference between my freedom of speech, which only relies on no one infringing upon my ability to do something, and saying I have a right to healthcare, which requires someone else to do something to my benefit, right? So that's a positive. So healthcare is a positive right. Freedom of speech is a negative right. So you are correct to say those are categorical different things. 100% correct, because they are.
Even though a lot of people have issues with that categorization, but that aside.
Right. Where you get into, I think, trouble is if you then say, well, negative rights are natural rights. That's when I think you open yourself up to getting stuck into sort of the mud of this kind of weird conversation with Andrew Wilson about, well, how can you say it's a natural right where the axiomatic beliefs, blah, 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 blah. So,
which Tim was doing a little bit of that separation.
Well, that Tim is one of these people that believes that negative rights are natural rights and positive rights are not. I think that's part of why I said Tim got kind of. That's why Tim got upset with the term entitlements, is because generally people that have that belief system that negative rights are natural rights, they view entitlements like as the positive rights, as the bad things, the things they don't necessarily want the government to do. So. Oshacy for $5 says the differences get blurred when people say there's no such thing as natural rights. I think the difference, I think it gets blurred when you say natural rights, because when you say something is a natural right, it's sort of, essentially when you say something is a natural right, what you're doing is you're front loading the negative right as saying the negative right is a good thing, a good deserving thing that all people should have. So I think saying it's a natural right is sort of what causes the contention. But Ace for $5 says, Tim is wrong on this. Why should I care how my actions will affect society? Me caring about an action is just a subjective value of mine.
Why should you care? Look, nobody cares. Nobody is really going to care until it affects them. And then they're going to push back against you or maybe get law enforcement involved, depending upon what you've done.
Well, I would say there's two reasons you should care about how your actions affect society. Number one is how do you want to fit into that society in the first place? Do you want to fit into that? Do you care about fitting in society? Do you care about being happy and healthy as an individual, which is very often for most people tied up in terms of, their societal status. Very few people are going to be the true, Sigma male, right? A lot of us are going to desire to be the true Sigma male, but I think you kind of have to be built that way. I think most people do care about their societal status and their place in society. And it's a good thing. We've evolved to have that feeling because that's what allows humans to cooperate together. So,
Yeah,
that's
there are
why I should
plenty
care.
of there are plenty of behaviors that I think affect society that there's no laws around. But the ones that
course.
like really affect society in a tangible way, there's usually laws come into place to prohibit or promote those kinds of behaviors. So
Right.
it's
Yeah.
in your best interest not to break the law and get yourself incarcerated.
Sure.
So that's where you should really care, right?
And the second, I was gonna say that's my second reason for why you should care is because if you don't want to fuck around and find out. So
Right.
Yasuke Nagasaki for $10 says only positive rights like forcing someone to provide you a service like housing or healthcare require force. Negative rights like freedom of speech prevent force from being used on you.
Well, I just completely disagree. So
Because you were saying that if you have a negative right like freedom of speech, you therefore have a duty to not infringe on someone else's.
and we've gone over this
But
on
wait, hold on a second. I mean, you could say, okay, so you could say, because they're kind of framing it differently. They're not saying you have a duty, they're just saying it doesn't require force. And I mean, I guess that's true. You don't have to have force to prevent you from infringing on someone else's on someone else's freedom of speech. But I mean, I guess actually,
you
unless you're
do.
going to say you do have to have force because people aren't going to adhere to it.
Blasphemy laws are the norm. That is
Right.
literally why the First Amendment became the First Amendment, and it was so radical at the time. It's like, what? You think you can let the population say whatever they want to say? Are you crazy?
You are 100% correct. Yes.
Yeah.
But what happens in these conversations is you kind of get bogged down in this idealism versus realism. So you're saying from a realistic perspective, you do need force to protect freedom of speech because the natural inclination for groups of humans is blasphemy laws.
If nothing else, from the government.
Right.
You are saying the government has a duty not to restrict your speech. That's what is the First Amendment.
Right. But then I think their response is, well, they're not talking about from a realistic perspective. They're just talking about from like a theoretical, idealistic perspective. You technically, if we all lived in the perfect world, you wouldn't need force to, not infringe on someone else's freedom of speech.
Right.
So,
Well, there are even laws around freedom of speech. Obviously, incitement is still not legal, and we use force to enforce that.
Right.
Anyway.
Though we have to separate force from duty because those are two different things. But.
Right.
CS Paffy for $5 says, if I don't defend my sheep from the wolves will eat my sheep. Therefore, my sheep are fundamentally fictional in the first place.
Look, that's
like
great. That's a great super chat right there. Yeah.
Mr. Ubercross for $10. Thank you, Mr. Ubercross says, I have a natural right to my religious beliefs. Even if you pass a law, you cannot alter what I believe to be true. There are some things that occur naturally that we do inherently possess. I don't actually agree with that framing because I mean, I agree with like the theory that like, yeah, people should be allowed to believe that, but I'm just saying, I don't agree with like you trying to say that that is an intrinsic natural process because obviously if you grow up in a society and everyone believes one thing, everyone has one religious value. If you grow up in a society where 100% of people are Christian and the belief system is to indoctrinate your children to believe whatever form of Christianity you believe, or you grow up in a society where 100% of people are Islamic and they believe in indoctrinating your children to believe in Islam, like that's infringing on, you're going to believe probably with high certainty whatever the religion is that's basically indoctrinated into youth.
Yeah, religiosity, you can make an argument, is innate, but even that is on a spectrum. Like different people are going to have different levels of religiosity, different levels of which religion is going to take. But you're exactly right. So it's which religion you get tends to be where you're correlated with where you're born in the world.
Right. But I'm saying like you can pass laws and laws and the society you live in is going to alter what you think is true, what you think and believe is true. You
Right.
could theoretically exist outside those bounds, but in all likelihood, you're probably not going to. So
Freedom of speech is kind of a dogma in the United States, but if you go elsewhere
100%,
in the
yeah.
world, they laugh in your face. What? You can say whatever you want. Get out of here. People can't handle that
Right. No, it's true.
because
That's a good dogma.
most people get so triggered elsewhere in the world. Look, especially in the Middle East where you got people, look, they can't even see a woman, beyond her eyes. They got to cover them up with a burqa. Otherwise someone's going to get fucking triggered. Right. Can you imagine somebody walking around saying, oh, look, they have a prohibition on drawing Muhammad. The fuck?
Right.
Their dogma is completely different. Their moral intuitions are completely different. So to say like this is some sort of, I would argue that that is more the natural inclination for people, and that we have, through social engineering, basically beaten that out of people through our kind of dramatic socialization in the West.
Mhm.
Don't you think the more natural position is I get triggered by hearing things that offend me?
That is a natural position.
Yeah, that's the more innate position.
Yeah. 100%. CS Pathia for $5 is Wilson lacks theory of mind. The IQ of a brisk New England's autumn day. There you go. Wow.
Oh, wow. Paffy really doesn't like Andrew
Don't like
Wilson.
Cyber Hunk returns for $5. Says only those who reproduce are those who remain. No organism is immune to that. From this, you can extrapolate why mankind evolved the way it did.
Thank you.
Of course. Yeah, 100%.
Thank you. They're biased towards survival and reproduction in
Though
a way
you
that's
could,
very hard not to
you could
acknowledge.
add a little asterisk there. You could
Oh,
say,
no.
well, no, I'm just saying you could add an asterisk on reproduce because since humans have created written and spoken
Culture,
language,
yeah.
right? A human can reproduce its culture or ideas via other ways besides purely just having children. Because obviously, like if you think Jesus was a real person who was alive, the cultural ideas or philosophical ideas of Jesus were reproduced, to this day, and Jesus never had children. So
This is where you get the idea of cultural evolution, which obviously you can update faster than the genome, right?
right. Ace for $5 says, look up JL Austin and you will see how Kami copied and ruined his argument about morality and language. Okay. Oh my God, I can't. Okay. I have to do it manually because Google doesn't want to. Okay, I'll check it out. JL Austin. Zero Fox for 25 months says X released bold and italics on mobile non-desktop normies having a field day. Shame all bold posters. Save for tasteful emphasis. Looking at you, Phil, that remains.
Oh, no, don't call Phil out.
That's funny. I haven't been. Let me look at Twitter. I haven't looked at Twitter.
I did notice some all bold posts. I have a screen reader that reads the tweets to me because I'm totally lazy. And the bold and italics always screw up the screen reader. It stops every time it changes from bold or italics. So,
Oh, really?
I don't read those tweets that have a bunch of bold and italics in them.
Well, it's just gonna be one of those things where like at first people are gonna like have too much fun with it and they're gonna use it way too much, and then people get bored of it and they'll calm the fuck down and they'll start using it appropriately. So
Nice.
I wouldn't worry too much about it. Brian for $5 says Andrew Wilson is debate brain to the point he's not being honest. I think Tim did a good job being clear with his answers. Yeah, I do too. On second viewing, I think Tim did a much better job than I initially thought he did. So
Cool.
Ace
Look,
for
we're
$5 says
Temple fans now. Take
Go
that to
say.
Destiny subreddit.
There you go. Ace for $5 says, I should have said this in my previous super chat. Why should I care about my actions' effects on society, bearing my own emotional preferences or feelings? Well, you shouldn't. What do you mean? You wouldn't. That's why sociopaths or psychopaths are so problematic. Because they'll just do whatever the fuck they want because they don't care.
Why
I mean,
should
there is no unless you believe in God and that there's some sort of divine dictate for you to do something, then no, everything is based on your feelings. So
Well,
should.
there are cases where obviously we go against our own intuitions,
such as.
which that's always a tough thing to do. Oh, well, the example people always point to is a guy who jumps on a hand grenade to save his whole platoon, right? That's got to be like way against your moral intuitions.
Well, no. That's against your biological intuition to live and reproduce, but it might be not against your moral society intuition in terms of what it means to be a good moral person, to
Right. Yeah.
sacrifice
But
yourself for the greater good.
I'm speaking strictly in terms of, I mean, this is why morality evolved, to get us to push past that feeling that we shouldn't do this, to do the thing that is hard to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a component to morality. Like a lot of times it's, it's easier to lie than it is to tell the truth. But a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times it's better in the long run to tell the truth. So
Mm-hmm.
you push past that. Oh, I could just, lie and get out of this pretty easily.
Yeah, but then it's one of those. It's two things. Number one, we're kind of assuming individual selection is correct. I mean, which is what most people believe. But who was it that was kind of arguing for group selection for evolution? And had that
Lots of
conversation with Charles
people.
Darwin. I mean, not Charles Darwin, with Richard Dawkins.
Jonathan Haidt does group selection.
No, there was, because remember we watched it on the stream. I think someone who had like a kind of conversation with Richard Dawkins about group selection.
Was
And they
it
had like a kind of compelling case about it. I don't
was
remember who it
it
was. Was it Brett Weinstein?
Brett
It
Weinstein?
might have been Brett. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, because if you have group selection, that kind of changes all the rules. Because then you can
He
say, well, someone
he has
evolved to jump on the grenade.
lineage level selection though, which is, he says, is a bit different than group selection,
That's
but I've
true.
never heard
That's
him
true.
articulate it anywhere. So
I remember him articulating it. I don't remember what the difference was exactly, but so
Wilson, there's E.O. Wilson and there's David Sloan Wilson. Both of them believe in group selection.
right.
Yeah. And David Sloan Wilson has a bunch of really amazing books on group selection that
Mhm.
have convinced me group selection is true.
Right.
Yes.
Ace for $5 says, and I don't view feelings as having truth, value, or objectivity, except in that they describe human feelings. Well, I mean, we could talk about this whenever you come on, because I'm not sure I clearly understand what it is you're honing in on here.
I mean,
that you're-
certainly you believe emotions are designed to motivate behavior, right? When you have a certain emotion, intuition, inclination, whatever you want to call it, it's pushing you in one clear direction, right?
Right.
This is why when your personal moral and this is what I was talking about, is when your personal moral inclination is to do one thing, but the societal norm or the moral value or the religion or the law or whatever it is pushing you, is saying don't do that, right? Pushing you in an
Mhm.
opposite direction. There becomes a conflict there. You're like, are you going to go with your gut or are you going to go with the social norm, right?
Right.
And a lot of building society is kind of pushing people to go against their gut because it forms a better society, a more cohesive society.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if most people do agree or conceptualize emotions, though, as chemical motivators for behavior.
Well, you should update because that's
I
the
agree they
best.
should.
Yeah, look,
because that is the way it works.
not only that, it's helpful for you as an individual because a lot of times emotions can get the better of us and can really destroy our day, destroy our week,
Right.
destroy our year.
Right.
And if you understand where those emotions are coming from, the source of those emotions, what they're driving you to do and why, it is a lot easier to combat those emotions. It really is. You don't have to be a slave to your emotions when you understand the purpose of them.
Right.
It's
Well,
kind of like knowing the matrix exists, right? You act
Yes.
completely differently.
and I think that's kind of some of the hangups of, we were talking about like talk therapy the other day.
Oh,
that
yeah.
Talk therapy gets on is that I think there's too much emphasis on like why you have a feeling as opposed to, I mean, that
How
could
to
be
control
important.
it.
But what I
Yeah.
think is more important is like, well, what is that? What is that feeling? What is that emotion? What is it like from an evolutionary perspective? What is it like trying to get you to do? because if you don't do it, that's part of why you have that feeling. But if you understand, if you can figure out what the feeling's trying to get you to do, then you can, combat it. Either do
And
the thing
yeah.
or not do the thing and combat it, or find a way to supplement it. So,
And even know from a rational perspective why not doing the thing is better for you. Then you don't have this nagging sensation in the back of your mind that you should have done it, right?
right.
And get past it.
Ice for another $5 says, I think the problem is how we define morality. I view morality as simply an expression of attitudes, and you guys view it as something else. Well, that
Yeah.
is the base point difference between us. So,
But I don't. The problem with that perspective, Ace, is it looks at morality completely from an individual perspective. And it's kind of like examining a market just by looking at your own personal spending habits, which you're not going to get very far that way, right? Markets are vast and incorporate all kinds of different behaviors on all different sides of transactions.
mm-hmm.
You can't understand a market just from your own personal spending habits.
Right. True. You have to get a collection of everyone's spending habits.
Well, and everyone's buying and production habits as well, because there's the producers of the things that you're buying and selling. Yeah. That's
Right.
a complete part of the equation. So, but anyway,
Anyway,
I guess it's time to go. We've gone long enough.
Anyway, we'll see y'all tomorrow and talk about the VP debate. So tune in and find out what happens.
Should be fascinating.
All right.
All right.
Take care, everybody.